I could take a break from this world. Running on a hamster wheel, but searching for something I can't feel. I just wanna be a lost girl and fly. Take a breath, feel my wings spread, levitate above the ground and make eye contact with clouds. Now I'm rising, I'm soaring above it all. I just wanna be free, finally, finally, finally. I wanna be free, finally, finally, finally. I wanna be free, finally, finally, finally. I wanna be free, finally, 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 finally. I always stay dreaming, never imagined I lose my spark. Living in this crazy time, putting back the pieces of my mind. I know how to run from the dark and fly. Feel my wings spread, levitate into the clouds. I'm so high above the ground. I'm rising, I'm soaring above it all. I just wanna be free, finally, finally, finally. I wanna be free.
Race, conversations, and law enforcement. This is Moses' People Speak.
Hello, everyone. This is Terry Watson. Welcome to another episode of Moses People Speak. Again, I'm Terry Watson, and I'm your host, the founder of Strategies for Justice. Well, it's been a while since we've been on the air, and I'm really happy to be back with you all. We do have a wonderful conversation lined up today. But before we get started, I want to make some quick announcements because we have been on away for a while. So for those who are interested, we did announce the save the date for the symposium. This year's symposium is going to be evaluating the criminalization of the intersectionality of race and disability. We are going to have this symposium April 2nd to April 4th. If you are interested in being a part of the planning or being a part of this symposium, please feel free to reach out. We definitely need some volunteers, and we definitely need some folks to help spread the word. So again, our symposium is April 2nd to the 4th. Next, this has been a long time coming, but our brother Lorenzo Boyd, he will be our opening guest for Moses People Speak in January. This date has been set. I know that there's been a lot of jokes about having him on because he was like, "Hey man, it's been 3 years. Why have I been on the show?" He definitely have the book out, so I'm looking forward to that conversation. So definitely save the date. We are speaking to my brother Lorenzo Boyd on January 13th, which is a Monday. So save the date, and definitely looking forward to that conversation. All right, so today's episode 27, we're talking to our brother Eddy Chrispin out of the Boston Police Department. And one thing I want to share is that I met Eddy about a year ago, roughly about a year ago, in Boston. And I heard his story. And again, I don't like to use the word unbelievable because I've heard these stories before, and I want to make sure that we heighten these stories and make sure they're well known. But Eddy Chrispin is a veteran, 25-year veteran out of the Boston Police Department. He is the past president of the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement, also known as MAMLEO. And he also is a brother with Haitian background. So, big shout out to our Haitian brothers. He joined the Boston Police Department, and he reached he reached to be a deputy superintendent. He then was appointed to the Peace Officer Standard and Training Commission, also known as POST, which is a 9-person board, which has some powers for looking at police accountability and investigating misconduct. And then he was demoted. He was demoted to a sergeant detective. And one of the things we talked about a lot on this show is we are looking for justice-minded policing. And when I was thinking about that, it reminded me of an episode that we actually had last year with this brother, Lieutenant Edward Raymond. And if you don't remember that episode, I want to put a short clip from the episode so you know what I'm talking about.
To blow the whistle, to expose corruption, to expose detrimental racist policing in the rank of police officer and fight to make it to sergeant, get set up by your own cops as a sergeant and fight even harder to make it to lieutenant. When people in law enforcement see that, they understand how nearly impossible that is. So they figure, you know what, if he figured out a way, despite speaking out at the bottom of the totem pole and still being able to ascend, then he's someone that can help me. And I'm working, basically becoming that person that can actually help elevate what I call the justice-minded officers, people in law enforcement who can see the detriments despite being employed by the system.
Well, with that said, my brother Eddy Chrispin, welcome to Moses People Speak. It is an honor to have you on this show. How are you doing today, brother?
Good afternoon, Terry. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate you elevating these stories, or else people would think they no longer happen. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Right, right. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation today. When we talk, well, actually last year and again this year, when we was in Buffalo, one of the things that I was really intrigued by was, one, your passion for law enforcement, being a 25-year veteran in law enforcement, but also the fact that your story, even though it is known, it is also trying to be quiet. And so I would love for you to sort of give some insight into what happened over the last couple of years, and really discuss what led up. First, let's talk about what led up to you being appointed on this commission.
Yeah. So I have a history of really advocating for police reform. Back in 2020, I was appointed as there was a 12-member police reform committee that was formed by then Mayor Walsh. I was one of two police officers assigned to that position. At the time, I was president of MAMLEO, as you said, the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. We had been very vocal after George Floyd, engaging community conversations. And above and beyond that, I had a history of doing community engaged work from the time I was in college. So I think people knowing me, knowing I was on this police reform task force and people trusting me, all those things led to me getting promoted and being assigned to internal affairs as a deputy superintendent. And then people had a certain level of trust that I would do right, that I would be equitable, I would be fair, I would not just have the lens of policing when I looked at these cases. So that was that. I was appointed. And then Massachusetts, as a result of this 2020 bill that was passed, MAMLEO has the ability to nominate several members. Out of those members, the Attorney General decides which person is going to be appointed to the Post Commission. And again, as a result of my work, having worked with her previously when she was a city councilor, and just my body of work over not even my police career, but over the time from the time I was in college, right? She trusted that I could do a job. I would bring knowledge, experience to the Post Commission and highlight police perspectives and issues for the members of the Post Commission who are not in law enforcement, but also be unbiased when I saw things that shouldn't happen in policing. And that's the story, how I got to be on the Post Commission.
And the one thing that I want to talk about too, because I always talk about Black law enforcement organizations that the communities should know about. And so we talked about MAMLEO, but can you sort of give a little background into what MAMLEO does and how they actually engage the community?
Yeah, so absolutely. MAMLEO was formed in 1968, filed a consent decree. Our goals have always been to create an equitable platform for officers of color to get hired, promoted, transferred to desirable positions, and also connect with the community, right? Because we know in the 60s, shortly after the civil rights movement, there was a big push to hire more officers of color, right?
Right.
So we continue to push for that. We continue to push for equitable treatment. We've done some studies in the past, and we found that officers of color were not transferred to desirable positions, where there was disparately treated in terms of discipline, and that there were certain opportunities that were not provided to us that others were provided. So we've been in the fight. Just last year, we won a $42 million settlement over promotional practices by the state that clearly showed that the exams were biased, they were racist, and that it eliminated people of color and women from being promoted. We've also fought. There was a hair test that they gave, which clearly was discriminatory, in that there were oftentimes false positives for people of color, just, well, black people really, just based on the follicle of our hair. So we've continued to be in the fight. We've pushed the department to promote people. We've pushed the department to promote people when necessary, and also allow people to be transferred to desirable positions. So that's the story of MAMLEO.
Thank you for sharing that, because I like to always talk about those organizations, because most community members don't know about them and the work that they're doing behind the scenes, especially when it comes to accountability and transparency in law enforcement. So now let's have this quick conversation, because the whole purpose of this episode was to really have a conversation about what led to the demotion, and why is that important for us to focus on. And we talked about the idea of justice-minded policing, and why that's important for us to support those officers or those individuals in law enforcement. Can you give us your story? What happened in this after the time you got appointed to this commission, and what happened about the demotion?
Yeah, so shortly after I was promoted, probably about 3 days later, I reached out to the superintendent in chief, who's the second highest ranking person in the police department. I explained to him that I had been appointed to the post commission. He congratulated me and said it was a very good thing. Shortly thereafter, I started hearing some ramblings that the commissioner was not happy about my appointment. I approached the commissioner several occasions, asked him to speak to me if he needed to speak to me. He's like, "Oh yes, I'll reach out to you, Eddie." After having reached out to him twice and him saying that he would reach out to me, never having heard from him, I received a call from the Office of the Legal Counsel. Now, I should point out that I'm one of those people. I think as adults, when we have issues, we should talk to people. So I reached out to him. He never got back to me. The next I heard was a call from the legal counsel's office telling me that there was a conflict of interest with my being on the command staff and being a member of the post commission. I thereafter did my research. I reached out to the attorney general. She confirmed my thought was that there was no conflict of interest. She said she had already vetted that argument. I took the additional step of reaching out to the state's ethics commission, which is an independent body charged with looking at conflict of interest. They got back to me 3 days ago and again confirmed there was no conflict of interest. I thereafter sent that information via email to the commissioner, chief of staff, and legal counsel's office. And let me take a step back. Above and beyond having checked with those two people, there are three law enforcement officials on the post commission. One of them is a chief of police. And I explained that indeed, if the chief of police is allowed to serve on the post commission and there are no conflicts with him and he has the highest level of information, then there should be none with me. All right. Shortly after sending the email, I within 5 minutes got a call to respond to the commissioner's office. As soon as I got there, the first statement from the commissioner was, "You represent MAMLEO on the post commission."
Hmm.
I thereafter took the step of saying, "No, I don't represent MAMLEO on the post commission. I was nominated by MAMLEO along with several other members. The attorney general chose me and nominated me, appointed me to that position because she
Right.
knows my ability to be objective, and that's why I'm on the post commission." I said, above and beyond, much like a judge is appointed to the bench by a governor or president, that judge does not become a representative of the person who appoints them. All right. And thereafter,
Right.
the conversation was, he said, "Well, I hadn't thought about it that way, but let me get back to you." Right. And you know how you have a conversation with someone and you already know they've made up their mind, but they do not
Right.
have a legitimate reason to give you,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
they've run of ammunition because they hadn't thought about it. But I already knew what the response was going to be. He said, "Let me think about it for a few days." I thereafter heard from him probably about a week later for me to come into the office. And very initially, my initial interaction was, "Where do you see yourself? Where do you want to do with your career?" I said, "Well, sir, as I see it, I'd like to continue to ascend and get to a place where I can really impact policing and be a leader of a police department." He says, "Well, as I see it, post has no value for you if that's what you want to do."
Wow.
Right. Yeah. He says, "If you want to stay on the command staff, I absolutely can make sure you get all the appropriate training. When the time comes, you'll be ready and prepared to go to a department and be the lead." So,
Wow.
having heard this, I exclaimed, I said, "Look, sir, not to dismiss your thoughts and ideas, but I think for me, both are equally important. I think the work that the Post Commission does is incredibly important to really creating public trust. And I think
Right.
my ability to be on the command staff and be a leader for all officers, but especially for officers of color who see the
Right.
work that I do, how connected I am to the community, and who see my ability not to just see things through the lens of policing, but through the lens of a human being, right? We talk about policing with humanity and dignity. Those are the things that I elevate." And he said, "Well, the conversation continued. At some point, he said, "Well, Eddie, you can't serve two masters." Right. And ultimately, the conversation continued for a little bit, but there was really not much movement. And as I left, he says, "You have till day's end to make a decision. You cannot do both."
Wow. Wow.
So,
After 25 years in law enforcement, that was wow.
yeah.
Wow.
And
You-
I
you-
think, go ahead, Terry, I'm listening.
no, no, I was just going to say that this concept of the post not being recognized as an important entity to the trust and the transparency and accountability within law enforcement, that does send a message to the community.
Oh, absolutely, it does, right? If you think about not just what happened 4 years ago when people took to the streets demanding accountability and transparency in policing, but things that people of color,
Right.
disenfranchised populations have been asking for over 100 years, right? We're at a point now, and every police department throughout the country should be embracing the concepts of transparency and accountability in policing. And as a police leader, this is something you should be pushing out to all your members, right? Making that a priority. And the idea that a being on a commission that advances those notions of transparency and accountability is counter to what you should be doing as a police leader.
Wow. And you know something too. I want to mention this too because this is also important. Is when this happened, you had great community support, and I want to highlight something real quick. So here is exactly what we was able to pull from social media as well. So you have folks come out to support you. You had different organizations. We had different editorials that was written. How the community came out to support you, and still there hasn't been any action. So can you sort of tell me what was that support like, and what did you notice from the community after this took place?
Yeah. So, and I got to just piece this in. I think when you think about what it is to be a police officer, oftentimes we don't value or we don't prioritize community engagement, right? And I
Right.
think the power structure of the police department didn't know how connected I was to the community, because people came out in large numbers on a hot summer July day in the basement of a church without AC. We had over 400 people show up and speak to me, who I am as an individual, not just as a police officer, who I am as an individual, how connected I am to the community, the good work that I've done, and why this decision made absolutely no sense. Right.
Wow.
The city council additionally wrote a letter to the mayor. That letter was signed by over 80% of the city council, asking them for some justification for this demotion. And to this day, nothing has been said other than the mayor saying, well, I fully support the commissioner's decision to decide who is on his command staff, not really addressing the elephant in the room, which is why transparency and accountability should counter to what a leader in the police department should be advocating for.
Wow. Well, you know what? At this time, I want to bring one of our a co-host on. Actually, this is the first time we're doing this on Most People Speak. Usually, it's just me and the guest. But after hearing your story, I said, you know what? I want to bring somebody on that I also have much respect for, and also someone who also has pushed the envelope in this conversation. So, but no strangers to Moses People Speak or SFJ. Those who don't know, Captain Sonia Pruitt. Sonia Pruitt is the executive and CEO and the founder of the Black Police Experience, and she is also one of the coolest individuals that I know. So with that, I want to bring Sonia Pruitt on. Sonia, welcome back to Moses People Speak. How are you doing?
Hi, Terry. Hi, Eddie. Good to see y'all.
Yeah. So you've been backstage, you've been hearing this story, and one of the questions I want to ask, and this is really to both of you too, because one of the important pieces to this story is not just the demotion of Eddie, but also the fact that the community coming out and being ignored. What message does that send to law enforcement, especially law enforcement of color, when they're trying to do the right thing by the community?
That could have a muting effect. That could be a roadblock. The community is, on a personal note, the community supported me the most of anybody, any group of people, any person when I was a police officer. I am clear that it was because of them that I finally ascended to captain and becoming the first African-American woman to be a captain in my police department. It was because of their pressure. It was because of their support. It was because of their trust in me. And I heard Eddie talking about, the community piece and how important the trust is. The community is looking to see who they can trust in law enforcement, public safety, the criminal justice system. And because, when you have that trusting relationship, then those institutions within the criminal justice system, that's when they gain legitimacy. You cannot have legitimacy without trust. And so your goal is to have someone who is someone like Eddie, who is a trusted messenger, who they know that they can go to and talk to, who they know that will be honest with them. And the police department should be really, really grateful for having someone like an Eddie to stand for them and build that bridge between police and the community.
Right. And Eddie, I'm gonna come back to you too. Is when I think about the message that this situation sends, what have you noticed since this took place from the community and also from this policing in Boston in general?
Yeah. So I will say we have a quote unquote progressive mayor. And by all accounts, we viewed the appointment of this police commissioner as he was going to come in and be a change agent. There are people who clearly say that this action and probably a number of other things that have happened in the city are counter to the people they have proclaimed themselves to be, right? I think at the end of the day, and when these things happen, I think there are people who don't speak for fear of what may happen to them. I've never been one of those people. And there are people who would who would follow my lead. But when they see this happening at the highest levels of the police department, imagine if you're a new police officer, and I've done a substantial amount of recruiting over the years, primarily a lot of young women and young officers of color who grew up in the Boston community. And I've sent the message, I've told them, I said, look, policing is changing. We need you in policing. If we are not here to take the place of others who have behaved badly, who have engaged in criminal behavior, who have treated people in a racist manner, then somebody is
Right.
going to be there. Well, this is the message I've been preaching, and they see this happen to me. They question whether or not policing is moving forward in a way that creates trust, that makes people think that as a department we're connected to the community, what they say matters, and we value what they say, because at the end of the day we talk about community policing as a partnership. If we're willing to discount the things that the community says, and we're willing to silence a police officer for being on a commission that advances transparency and accountability, then for me, what is it that we prioritize? What are the things that we value?
Right. And again, this. I think you hit a important point too, Eddie. Is this the idea that if folks are looking, especially Black law enforcement, is looking into entering law enforcement to make a change, because there are folks who enter law enforcement with the idea that they're going to be a part of the change, they're going to be part of the transparency, the reform, and they see a story like yours, right? I think that would deter folks from entering law enforcement that could otherwise be great for the community, right? And that's the part that I think is so important. And you mentioned the recruitment and the retention and the promotion, and that's one of the things that I think that I would also want to highlight too. So, how Eddie? One more question for you too is, when you think about the fact of the community coming out to support you, has that support been sustained? Is that something you still seeing today?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So I think, like most movements, right? People initially are very invested, and everybody is busy in their lives. And I think the ultimate goal of this administration has been to, over time, have people forget it and never answer to people's questions or concerns. There still continues to be. There's a group that's been created as a result of my demotion, that really speaks around police reform. Police reform in Boston, is it real, or are we being sold a false bill of goods? And I think right now,
Mm.
just based on this decision, I don't know that this administration, I say this administration, from the mayor's office on down, this message resonates with people that they are not aligned with police reform, right? And I don't see them doing anything differently that would say to the community, this is the direction that we're moving in, right? Above and beyond my demotion, there's been nothing to counter and prove to the public that they are doing something different that speaks to accountability, transparency, police reform, none of those things. Matter of fact, a number of people from the community have said, look, we're moving backwards in some ways.
Mm.
Right. Mm.
Mhm. You know what, Terry? That makes me think about conversations that we've had about what is the responsibility of Black leaders in law enforcement. Like,
Right.
is the goal to? This is not accusatory, but this is a question: is the goal to attain these heights, make a lot of money, have a title? Because I, as well as I'm sure other people, have noticed that some of our Black police leaders, once they get to that commissioner, chief of police, all of a sudden, all the things that we thought that they stood for, they don't demonstrate anymore. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that they've sold their souls? Somebody got in their ear? Because we know that this happens. You better toe this line or you're going to be out of a job. I mean, and so then the second part of that is, what kind of courage must it take to be a Eddy Chrispin and say, I'm going to stand as a commander, I'm going to stand in this. And then I'm going to also go over here and I'm going to stand for police reform, which is the right thing to do. And for him, there's no conflict, but obviously there's a conflict for other Black police leaders in that area.
Eddie, and I want to come back to you on that question too. Sonia, you bring up a really good point. When you were given the option, you were told you could either join the post or be promoted or move up your career ladder, and you chose the community over, well, not just moving up, but also eventually being demoted. I mean, I don't even know. I can't even fathom what that is like to be in a career for 20, for you 25 plus years. And as I understand it, someone put in the private chat here, a brilliant man you are. I don't know. You can't see the private chat right now, Eddie, because I'm pretty sure you can't see it. But someone mentioned it here, how brilliant you are and how sometimes that your brilliant side and the fact that you are willing to still stand, how that might even scare some folks in the administration because they're used to folks backing down or bending knee, and that is obviously not you. So my question that comes to you is, what can the community do to make sure that we do support you and individuals like yourself?
Yeah. So, we just had an election. I tell people the one way to answer these questions is show up at the poll, right?
Mm.
Because as much as politicians will tell you what you want to hear when they're running for office, right? We have to hold politicians accountable. Not only them, but the people they put in place, right? Because those people are supposed to align with their vision, whether it be at the public health level, whether it be at the police level, whether it be at the educational level. The people they appoint to those positions are supposed to align with their vision of progression. And if they're not, then we need to show up at the polls and vote, right? And then the other piece is, I think sometimes we hear these things happen and we're like, oh, I guess I can't do anything, right? There are things that we can do. And I think for me, this ultimatum as to either stay on the command post, on the command staff, or move, or leave the post commission. I think for me, I was not willing to do that, and I think it's important because at the end of the day, if you value the title and the position more than you value your own sense of morals, ethics, character, then you will succumb to the pressure, because not only are you losing the position, but it also limits your ability to ascend and go to another department. And then there's the financial burden of being demoted, right? I can't blame other people. I know for me, the person that I am, the way I was raised, I always knew that for me, it was a non-issue. I was always going to pick doing the right thing. And especially if you can explain to me what the conflict of interest was. To this day, no one has yet to speak to what the conflict of interest. It went from a conflict of interest to them saying a perceived conflict of interest. All right, well, it's a perceived conflict of interest. So what happens when you are able to confirm that it was a perceived conflict of interest that doesn't exist? Rather than addressing it, you dig in and you stick to your guns and you say, you know what? I'm not going to change my position.
Right. So you and I have had many conversations about that concept of sticking to your morals and sticking to your ethics and your beliefs. One of the things that I want to put out there too is before this episode, I did some a lot of digging, of course, and one of the things I want to offer up is some support behind Eddie, because again, one of the conversations that we need to do as a community is acknowledge when we do have the right people in uniform, and when we actually have them, making sure we show up and continue to show up. I think the idea of just showing up when the topic is hot and then backing away it doesn't actually do any good. So what I've done is I'm gonna put it in the chat as well. Here's a breakdown of everything that we sort of talked about today, including the story, the articles that was written, all of the not all of it, but some of the editorials, some of the community support. I know even the Latino organization came out to support you, Eddie. That was wonderful to see too, when we see some solidarity with other organizations. But also in that link, there is a letter that we're asking people to sign off on as well, either as individuals or as organizations and businesses. Especially if you're I think it's called a volunteer. Now, what's the Boston people call? Is it Boston? I always forget it. What is it called? Boston,
If you
Bostonians, I think it's called.
Bostonians.
Bostonians. I was close, especially if you're a Bostonian. You know what? Sometimes you gotta have fun. So we gotta laugh or we gotta cry. But what I'm gonna put there in the chat right now is if you are one, share this story. That's the one first thing I want to say. Share this story because I think the conversation that we're having today, like I mentioned earlier, is a conversation that could be had in multiple states and multiple cities. So share this story.
Countries too.
Multiple. You're not lying about that. But the one thing I want to put out there too is once we get some signatures out there, we want to actually again show up again. I think we got to keep this on the agenda, especially as time goes on. So, Eddie, let me ask you what again. I know you mentioned one thing is showing up at the polls, but is there anything else that you can think of that civilians can continue to do to support you?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial that people in leadership positions, both at the city level and the police department level, continue to hear from people, right? Call the Boston Police Department, call City Hall, call your city councilors, express to them how outrageous this decision is, right? I think at the end of the day, yes, every city councilor has a million and one things that come before them, but you can't allow things like this to happen and let it die. And which is, I think, what the city is relying on. They're relying on this story dying and they're moving on business as usual, right? And I think every time we allow something like this to happen and we move on business as usual, it creates an opportunity for them to continue to engage and act in much the same ways, right? We have new leaders, but to me, as I see it, they're different faces serving the same old system. They're not really digging in and really trying to progress in any way that says that we as an organization, as a society, as a government are ready to do things differently, right? It shouldn't take once we had millions of people take to the streets 4 years ago. And across the board, every single government agency entity said, yes, absolutely, these are things we need to do. 4 years later, we are countering that movement and going right back to where we started. The reason that we have these protests, right? Racist systems, homophobic systems, sexist systems, right? That reinforces the ability to oppress people, especially those who speak against them, right? As long as we continue to allow these movements to die, then these systems will continue to do the same things they've done for hundreds of years.
You're not telling any lies there. So yeah, I want to ask, do you have any questions or any insights that you'd like to share?
I think Eddie hit on a really great point about where we are now, 4 years after the murder of George Floyd. He didn't say that, but I'm saying it because 24 years ago we were watching, and if we were still the police, trying to manage the uprisings and the protests of our citizens in this country and all over the world, because it didn't just happen here in America. There are people who are feeling it in other countries too. And so I'm thinking about where we are in the country today. Here it is, November the 9th. This is 4 days after an election. And I just want to say how crucial it is for us to continue in this vein and to share this type of conversation with people that we know who are not the police, because they need to know not only what is going on, but what fair-minded, trustworthy people like Eddie are doing about it. That, people are not just sitting by and allowing us to live in a police state. And which looks like, according, if we believe what certain people say, that might be where we are headed, that the police are going to be weaponized for personal use of politicians. And the police are counting on some of the institution itself, not individuals necessarily, but the institution is counting on being able to do things without any repercussions, because someone has said, we're going to give you full immunity. Those are real issues that will affect the lives of people in this country. And I think that we should continue to push the envelope in that regard and continue to have these conversations so that people will know what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. I want to apologize for folks who've been following my instructions, but technology sometimes is not my friend. I did fix the link for to sign the letter, and so it is now working. My apologies for those who've been messaging on social media asking to fix it. So it should be you should be able to do that right now. So okay, so I want to come back to you, Eddie, because anytime someone comes on Moses People Speak, we ask the very same question. I think it's very important, even more so today. And I want to really phrase this question just a little bit differently, because this is happening in Boston. And again, I mentioned a brother earlier today from New York, Lieutenant Edwin Raymond. I know folks that's been on this show who have had similar experiences, either as whistleblowers or just being justice-minded police officers, right? They've had some pushback either from the department or their local government, right? So, and you really mentioned in your time here, you mentioned how important it is to recognize the impact that your local government have. So, my question to you, as always to every guest that comes on this show, is what is your message to America? And I always spotlight my guests when they do this.
Yeah, so I think there are certain sectors of the country where people live and think, look, we're in a progressive state where things are moving forward. It's important that you hold people accountable, right? When we appoint people to positions, we elected people to positions, it is absolutely crucial that we hold them accountable. If we don't hold them accountable, then there is no way for us to ensure that they are moving and acting in a way that addresses our concerns, right? We elect people into those positions because we feel that they are going to do what we want, what is in our best interest. But as long as they continue not to do those things, we have to hold them accountable. And whether it's by calling, elect them out of office, or whatever it is that you need to do, you need to participate in these conversations. We cannot sit back and allow ourselves to be taken back.
Well said, brother. Well said. Okay, if you don't mind, Eddie, I know we're about 15 minutes to go, but what I'd like to do, because I haven't been paying attention at all to the chat, but at this time, I want to ask folks if they have questions to please ask those questions. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in about 30 seconds. So please stay on. Thank you very much.
Tell us what you really mean, ma'am.
Law enforcement officers should be role models, period. If you can't be a mentor, you shouldn't have that uniform.
I could take a break from this world.
All my blinders are taken off. I can see what you guys are talking about. Y'all don't see what we're talking about yet. Policing is the law enforcement arm of systemic racism.
Well, the message for America is that they need to wake up. We need to stop the repeat. We need to stop the revolving door. And we need to come up with better ways of law enforcement. Criminal justice reform needs to reflect what it is. Ain't no way in the world somebody should be sitting in jail with a $1 bail for months.
I just wanna be free, finally.
All right, welcome back. So at this time, I always ask folks who are watching. We still got a few folks who still logged in. If there's anyone even in the backstage who wants to? That's a great question. How do we reverse the great injustice that was done to Eddie? And I think there's a couple of things that we should highlight as the injustice. One, of course, is the demotion. Two is not recognizing Eddie's contributions to post and what that would mean for the community. But I think, Eddie, you mentioned one more thing too, is that this also impacts folks' livelihood. So that's a great question. How do we reverse the great injustice that was done to Eddie? Eddie, maybe you have an answer to that. Also.
I think generally, right, when these things happen, the most important thing that needs to be done is we need to bring these things to light because the system depends on these things staying behind the curtain and them never having to answer to them. Bring them to light, ask these people to explain their reasoning, their thought process. Because if we don't, I think most stories in America, they have like a 3-day news cycle. The fact that we're still talking about this, right, 4 months later,
Right.
for me, elevates this issue. The fact that there have been 5 different articles written by the major newspaper in the city of Boston um, continues to bring light to this issue. I think politicians, people who behave badly, depend on their ability to keep things behind the curtain and stay in the dark, and they hope that these things will die out and we won't call them out and ask them to explain their decisions. So I think to the extent that we're still having this conversation, there's been as many newspaper articles. There's a group that's been created as a result of my demotion, Citizens for Police Reform in the city of Boston, that there are letters still being sent to the city council to have a hearing on it. I think for me, that's satisfying. But again, we need to keep the pressure. And I think, again, yes, I understand everybody's busy, right? Everybody has something going on in their lives. We have children, we have work, we have parents that are wholly reliant on us, right? But I think it's important because if we allow these things to happen and we don't speak up, when it happens to you, the question is going to be who is going to speak up for you, right?
Mm.
They come for one of us and we all stay silent and, well, it doesn't impact me. I'm going to be quiet. They come for the next person. Everybody's like, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm not going to say anything lest something happen to me. And then there's no one else left. They've taken all of us out one by one. And you look around, you're standing by yourself, and you do not have the slightest chance of fighting back the injustice.
That's real. That's real.
Yes.
Yeah. Sonia, do you have anything to add to that too?
Nope. I mean,
well said.
it was pretty much, that's the answer. That's a great answer, and it's true, unfortunately. And I'm just saddened that we have been pushed back to this place. But I do want to point something out, something I forgot about. The fact that Eddie was willing to not only serve as in the capacity of a law enforcement officer, but also on the post commission says a whole lot about his character. And there are other officers who would love to step in those shoes. And so we need examples like an Eddie to show us how can I do both of those things and not be overwhelmed by a sense of guilt or that I'm serving more than one master. No, you're only serving one master, and that master is the master of what's right. Right. So you don't have to consider that you are dividing yourself, and don't let anyone from the institution and system of law enforcement tell you otherwise, because public safety is there for the public. Right. And this is what they are asking for us to do. And so we should support the public's needs, the community's needs, as well as just do what we said we were going to do when we took the oath, which is I'm going to stand for what is right, what's fair, and what's equitable.
Yeah.
And just real quickly, just so you know, I think a lot of people think once you become a police officer, the only lens through which you see the world is through the lens of law enforcement. Right. For me, I've said this 4 years ago in the midst of all the protests. I said, look, I'm black before I'm blue. Right. I have 2 sons who are clearly black. They walk through the streets. They are black. Right. Nobody says, oh, they're children of a law enforcement officer. I have family, friends who are near and dear to me, who walk through the world, and the lens through which they see that we see the world should not be primarily through the lens of law enforcement.
That's right.
It should be through a lens of humanity. And
Yes.
if we can't do that, and all we can focus on is seeing things through the lens of law enforcement, we will have lost our way.
I don't know how to follow that up.
There's another question, though. We do have something else.
We got 2 more questions that's in the chat.
Yes.
So someone asking a question: has someone else been appointed to the position previously held by you, Eddie? Do you know?
No, as of right now, no one's been appointed to that position.
Wow. So that again, I think that sends another message to to the law enforcement and the community. I think that's the kind of things that, and it goes to. So I don't know. This question also came into, and maybe I don't know how to really frame it, so I'm just going to put it up there. But this question is: what other steps are being taken to punish the guilty parties? And so I was leading that way. I wasn't saying punish, but I would say hold accountable, right?
Hold them accountable.
Because we're not trying to punish people, but we are trying to hold people accountable, right? And so, and I want to put that out there. So that was great question, by the way. I want to put that back up there. It's a great question. Yeah.
So just for clarity, the mayor did call me, and I gave her a piece of my mind. I told her that this was not what people expected from her, and I told her, from my perspective and to the perspective of a large number of people I had spoken to, she represented the same system. She's a woman that was elected into office as the first person of color, an Asian woman, to the seat of mayor, right? And who ran on a progressive platform. And I told her, if this is what a progressive platform is, we have lost our way. I said, this is a kind of decision that should be summarily should have been condemned. But rather than do that, you've circled the wagons, have opted not to answer the public's questions, and have simply said, I support the commissioner and his decision. He has the right to create his own command staff. Whereas the question is not whether or not the commissioner has a right to appoint people to his command staff. The question should be whether or not someone should be punished for being on a statewide commission that ensures that there is transparency, accountability, and uniformity in policing as it relates to education, et cetera, and training.
Yeah. You know, I gotta add just one more thing too, Eddie, because in the letter that I've written for your support, there's something that I came across that I want to highlight. So on the city of Boston's website, they do have an equity DEI page. And on that page, there was something that they said that really got me thinking. It was the city's recognition of its role in perpetuating societal inequities. I want to say that again. It's the city's recognition of its role in perpetuating societal inequities. So you acknowledge the role that the city has historically took, and you made a promise to your fellow citizens that after recognizing it, you will not be a part of it anymore. Then this happens, right? And again, I was not. Again, I'm going to put the actual link to the letter again in the chat box, folks. Please read it, and if you are so inclined, please to sign on. I think the one thing that's important when we're talking about politicians that comes with promises of recognizing inequities and being justice-minded, and then have this happen, it sends a contradictory message. And so the question that I'm going to propose is, what is the true message? Are you recognizing it and trying to repair it, or are you trying to follow the old status quo? And so this message, again, I didn't come up with it. That's what the city came up with. It's on your website. It's on your website. It wasn't hard for me to find because all I did was Google City of Boston, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the first thing that popped up on the website was that. That's where I want to put it out there, because this goes to what you were just saying, Eddie, is you ran on this idea of being progressive and understanding the role that government has had in inequities. So this should not even be a conversation we're having today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes a lot of these organizations, community leaders, they're very performative when they claim to be their progressive platform, right? They will come out and they will say all these things, but there are no actions to support those claims they are making. And I think we live in a world where people are performative, right? You'll show up in the Black community, show that you're hugging people, but at the end of the day, are you really comfortable in those spaces? Do you really understand some of the barriers people face? right?
Mhm.
Being oftentimes the only black person in the room and everybody's looking at you and asking why you're there, despite the fact that you have exponentially more education experience than the vast majority of people in there, right?
Yes.
And those are the things that until people acknowledge that these things still happen, and we're content with being in the room and being silent or being set in the corner and not being part of the conversation, these things will continue to happen. And as long as we accept that it didn't happen to me, it wasn't me. And if I stay quiet, it won't happen to me. I can keep making my money. I can keep having the title. Guess what? Your turn's going to come. And then you'll look back 20, 30 years later after your career and you said, you know what? I contributed absolutely nothing to this profession that I came in. I didn't have to be a police officer. I'd already graduated from law school when I became a police officer. Much to the concern and disdain of my father, he was like, "You went to law school, you're going to become a cop." All right?
Yeah, I know.
And
I noticed that. I noticed that. And that's what I asked you that question. I noticed you have a JD. So I asked you that question too, bro. I was like, wait a minute. You could be teaching at law schools right now.
Man, listen, you know, and not that, you know,
No,
for
I'm
me, I
only
started
joking.
off as a social worker. That
Right.
greatly impacted how I see the world, right? I was a social worker in one of the worst housing complexes in the city of Boston. I was the only person in my office who would go out to that complex. I went to law school. I worked for the City Bar Association. I got a Thurgood Marshall Fellowship because of my community work. When I was in college, I ran a violence prevention and tutoring mentoring program. I came back here. I worked as a probation officer. I worked as the Department of Youth Services worker. So I see holistically what the picture is, right? From a social perspective, what are the problems? It's not just law enforcement. There are all of these barriers we have. And I think for me, I bring a unique perspective to law enforcement, right? And I think the
Right.
other piece, there are very few people in law enforcement who are willing to acknowledge that I can't just look at things through the lens of law enforcement. When we bring young people who do not have life experience, who do not have the live experience and don't understand that some of the stuff that you're arresting people for, if we were in the same shoes, we could not do any better, right?
Mm.
And we have to understand that as law enforcement. If there's people who go in who want to create positive impact, if we don't understand that, we're going to walk away from a career in law enforcement 20, 35, 25 years later, and we'll have had no impact. It will stay the same.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna offer this because I know we're coming at time, and I see I can't follow the chat, to be honest with you. I saw things coming in. There was a question that came up, Eddie, about right, was your title as sergeant detective, was that prior to you being appointed to commissioner?
No, well, I was a sergeant detective, then I was appointed to the command staff. And then once I was demoted, I went back to sergeant detective.
Okay.
And I think the other piece of it is, right, I think it's important for people to know there are subtle ways of sidelining you. They've sent me out way outside the city to an area where I have no connection to the community. This is an hour and 15 to an hour and a half drive from my house. My base, the community that I've done work with for the last 25 years, is no way connected to that. They thought they did me a favor. We're going to send you to the civil rights unit. Yes, that's something that's near and dear to my heart, but I'm sitting at a desk. I'm not engaging with the community. I've started to come up with some creative ways so that I can go out and educate people. But there are subtle ways that they will come at you and make sure that you know who's running things.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Well, what I'll say too is I know you have some folks backstage that logged on, Eddie. I'm not sure if any of them wanted to join on this call or not. We have about 2 more minutes, but again, I really want to give you the last word. I know you already give your message to America already, but I want to just give you the last word for this program, and any message that you would want to share. Again, I'm going to ask some folks to please sign on to the letter. I'm going to email this out as well, so if you don't catch it on this call, I will also email it out as well. But Eddie, any last words for folks who are watching?
Yeah, I think over the last few years, we've had a lot of difficulty recruiting people for policing, especially young people of color. So for me, I always remind them they have an obligation to be able to step in the shoes of people they've watched misbehave over the last few years. And if we continue to go down this line that we are not going to join policing, police departments will look the way they did in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? We have to step into these shoes. We have to be intentional and know what our purpose is when we put on that uniform. It's not just to serve the system. It's to serve our communities with character, with dignity and integrity.
Well, with that said, folks, I really enjoyed this conversation. Eddie, if you want to stay on for about 2 more minutes after we log off, I just want to make sure I get some things to you. But you know what, folks? Please share this video, get the word out. We cannot let this story go quietly away because that's what folks are depending on happening. Sonia, I want to thank you for hopping on this call too. By the way, this by the way, Sonia, first time having a co-host for this, and I was like, my dear sister Sonia, because I know what you've been through as well, and I want to thank you, Sonia, for your time here on this show. So
Always.
yeah. So with that said, folks, I hope everyone have a great Saturday afternoon. Get this. Make sure to share this. Sign the letter if you want. If you want to reach out to us, if you even want to say, listen, I want to spread this even further to folks to get on these folks because I think we might have a plan moving forward. So, all right. Well, with that said, everyone have a great afternoon. Get Eddie. So please stay on.
Yes.
Okay.